Hello, here we are today. It's Kat, and I'm here with the Miss Nancy, and we're going to talk about the importance of I with Nancy. How you doing there, Nance?
I'm excited to be here and share all this with you.
Awesome. So, what is the importance of I? What's the basics of this self care and the I?
One of the primary factors is, when we grow up, we are not allowed to make I statements because that's selfishness. And we know people who are selfish. So we wind up subliminally programmed that we don't count because we can't make those I statements. The other part of that is we have to be selfish of the selfness that we are. So there's more than one way to look at selfishness. And with I, we get to validate the selfness that we are. We get to put a feeling with it so that we can reduce some of the stresses that we feel. But the listener can understand where we're coming from. We don't have to play games. We start a sentence with the word I instead of you, and we don't inflame people because you is very challenging. It puts people on the defense. And one more thing about I, when we do make an I statement, we become present for the listener to relate to.
Right. I think we grow up and we feel like that we are our people around us define us and tell us who we are. Well, this is my
Absolutely.
little girl. This is my little boy. He's the star on the in Odyssey of the Mind or anything like that, and it takes the child out of self.
It does. And it puts us in the category of trying to achieve an identity instead of looking at the one that's already within us in our core.
And what do you mean by within us in our core?
Well, deep down inside, like when we came into this being, we were innocent. And then we learned as little kids to pick up on other people's opinions about us. You're stupid. You'll never amount to anything. People are so happy to give us opinions that really don't apply to the genuine person that we are. So we grow up with these negative beliefs about ourselves and we operate from those. It's just really sad how accurate we do that.
So how do we get back into identifying I and defining I?
It goes to realizing that we are important, and to make those I statements, we validate ourselves in a way nobody else can, and we don't need somebody else to validate us because we can do it for ourselves. We just make I statements, and I statements are more accurate than anything we could do. It puts a level of genuineness in our conversations. And as I said a while ago, it makes it easy for people to listen to what you're saying instead of be defensive about it. When we make those I statements, we validate our own worth to ourselves. I says we exist.
So when you have a detachment, I mean, in your practice that you do, when you have a detachment with people who can't even identify how they feel, because that's another thing that I believe that we don't ask ourselves, how do I feel about this? Because we're detached from that. And you can't define self if you don't even know what it is or
Right.
how it
I
looks
so
or how it
agree. I
feels.
so agree. And I do insist a lot that people start using I statements. I repeat often the four factors of making an I statement to validate oneself, making an I statement so we don't make a you statement, making an I statement so we can put a feeling with it. And when we put a feeling with that I, we get to another level of validating ourselves and we get a sense of relief because it's been acknowledged. So we say, I feel angry when you talk to me that way. We don't have to worry about what the other people's thinking because the whole thing was we put the message out there. We're responsible for the effort, not the outcome. And we validated
Right.
ourselves.
when people are dealing with domestic violence and abuse and coercive control, um, there's a real drive from the perpetrator to disassociate you from the self. And so I believe you had a handout about feelings.
The words, it's one I found on the internet. It's talking about examples of negative feelings. And the handout, I cross out the word negative because all feelings are valid. And it's in columns. Words underneath the columns head will be classified more as judgmental. I'd have to get it out to read it, and which I can do pretty readily. It just would take a break. But it's so helpful for people to have a word or phrase that they can use to speak up for themselves. One lady, I was getting my handouts out of the drawer, and all of a sudden she said, "Beaten down, that's how I feel." And I went, "Oh, there it is. It's right there on that sheet." That enables her to say, "I feel beaten down when you talk to me that way or you treat me that way."
Doesn't that help to build into building a boundary about that too, as well?
It does.
Once you identify how you feel.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny. People don't very often argue with you. They can try and refute it. What did I say? You can't. People rarely argue with an I statement. They'll argue like the Dickens with a you statement. So, and we can't avoid use of use of the word you in a sentence. Just don't start it that way. A sentence that starts with you is an opinion, and we need to own it.
Right, because it sets up the person to be defensive in what's coming at them.
Very much. It's very accusational.
If I said to you, "You sure do read a lot, got a lot of books there," then based on how you feel about having a lot of books is going to be your response.
Right.
Is it going to be like, is her tone too harsh? Does she mean something else? Who is she to tell me I have too many books? Whereas if I say something like, "I like the fact that you have a lot of books. It tells me that you have a real respect for education and learning and growing."
You don't even have to get that involved. You can say, "Wow, I see you have a lot of books."
So I really liked what you said about the selfishness in your statement again. And I think we'll put that at the end along with the piece of paper that you're talking about in helping you to identify feelings. So how would we put an I statement together? What are the basics of needing that?
Start making them. Some of it is almost like giving yourself permission to make an I statement, because people can be so beaten down they just don't know they exist, as you mentioned a while ago.
Right.
And you know, the importance of making an I statement is we get to stand up for ourselves. And if we're not making an I statement, we're not being present. We don't exist if we're not standing up for ourselves. And so a lot of what I do, and I value my learning this myself, is helping people to how to speak up, give them the tools so they can. And in doing that, they start getting a sense of worth. I've watched clients over the years do their own therapy. People come in all the time with the idea, "I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable," things like that. So they start making I statements, and they start realizing that, "Oh, I do count."
Well, I know me for myself in making I statements coming out of this of not feeling that I was worthy enough to be able to say what I thought. A lot of what I would say would come out very angry, and I liken it to having a sword that's beat up in not very thoughtful about it. And I think we have to give ourselves some grace when we're coming out to make these statements, that they don't have to be perfect, because we don't
Oh,
have to be perfect,
no, and
right?
perfect and perfection is such a trap. Somebody has to define the categories, the segments, the rules for being perfect. And somebody may give those to us somehow. We don't know what somebody else hears when we talk about perfection. It's such a trap. It's so why when my favorite affirmations for people is I now realize I am purely okay and I don't have to prove it or earn it. It's okay to go to a movie. It's okay to go to dinner. It's okay to go to bed early. It's okay to sleep in late. It's okay to watch TV. It's okay to read a book. It's okay not to watch TV.
Well, isn't it really about having the rules to your own game, that if people want to come into your space and have a relationship or have conversation, that you get to have a say in how that is.
Right. And when we get it in our core how purely okay we are, so many things in life just don't bother us because they don't pertain to us. That doesn't mean we don't continue to make mistakes. I make my mistakes. There was a time I would identify myself by those mistakes, and a lot of people do because it goes back to the fact that we've not been allowed to make I statements, therefore we don't count. So teaching people to make I statements and the value, the 4 values of why we make I statements helps them get a place to start. And many times I've had clients, it's so awkward, but if they keep trying, it becomes more. There's time when I first was learning this, I thought, oh my goodness, I. And then I realized I wasn't walking when I was born, so keep at it. And I don't have any idea how many times I start a sentence with I because I just do.
I think for myself, I liken anytime I start a new challenge, I like it to, if I was trying to grow a muscle, the muscle's going to be very weak and not very uh, serving. And the only way to do it is to do it and to keep making it become stronger until it just works because you've done it enough.
Hmm.
Um,
I like your
it,
analogy. Hmm.
Thank you. When we're talking about, for me, I look at nature, and I look in nature, and we're not critical of nature. Like, what's your favorite animal?
Cats. I love cats.
Aw. So we don't look at a cat and say, well, you're a lousy representation of a cat. We look at it for its innate beauty. It's purely okay. It doesn't have to prove that it's a cat. It doesn't have
No,
to earn that it's a cat.
no. It can
It's
be
just a
as
cat.
annoying as it wants to be, and it's still a cat, and I still love him.
Exactly. So, what's the reason we do that to ourselves, and how can we, work?
I think it goes back to that not being able to make I statements, and the fact that we can't rationalize what our parents mean. So, and when we're born, the left side of our head is for logic, and the right side is for emotion and intuition. And babies are born totally right brain. They have to be in charge that way, so they get an idea of danger. It's a survival thing. They have to know what their world is, and so if they have parents that don't know how to be parents, and who does, then the kids start forming an opinion about themselves based on the outer evidence that they see, which is not necessarily accurate. So
Right?
they form these negative beliefs, and parents aren't very good at approving, but we do. So day in, day out, we just kind of get more proof there's something wrong with us. And the conclusion is, I'm not good enough. And so then people become type A personalities down the road. And they're trying so hard to feel good enough. And they can't get that from other people because if someone gives you a compliment and it doesn't fit that inside feeling that we have, we'll find a way to deflect it or sabotage it. So the kind of approval we all want can only be given to ourselves. Otherwise, we will argue with it. As I said, deflect it.
Well, I say a lot in what I talk about is we can't give what we don't ourselves possess. So you can't give away what we don't own and have. So if I don't feel good about myself or I don't feel like I'm enough, I can't fill somebody else up to be enough.
I so agree. At the same time, that won't keep you from trying and trying
Right.
and trying.
Right. And that's because we're looking for that validation to come from outside sources that say we're enough, outside sources to say that we matter, that we care. And so when you're talking about, and I know when I'm talking about as human, us not being perfect and just be solely human, and I know you agree with me because we've had a talk about this, and it's like that muscle, getting that muscle to go stronger. You talking about I statements. Also, I'd kind of like to plug into if we're not feeling good about ourselves, catching that thought process that happens that says I'm not good enough, and really start to try to build that muscle of what you're saying, which is self is important. How I feel is important. How I express that is important.
Extremely.
And even anger, that such a expression that people aren't comfortable with. I don't want to be angry.
Right. That's one of the things that I love to do is I'll ask, address anger because everybody's got something to be angry about. But primarily, I see anger as a gift. It helps us. It helps us know we count. We've been disrespected. Even if we're not aware of it, we get angry because somewhere in our psyche, we know we count, and somebody just violated that. And so I think I see anger as a gift because it tells people they have value.
It's going to be so wonderful to talk to you because you're going to come on and we're going to be regular little group that talks about self-care and self definition. We didn't even get into self-compassion and how that is. So you want to hit on that a little bit with self-compassion?
Self-compassion.
Or compassion for self.
Yeah. My sense is that it goes back to just acknowledging I. Here again, we realize we're letting ourselves know we count, and then to realize since there's no perfection to be had, start giving ourselves a kind of a grace that, we weren't walking when we were born. You have to start someplace, so realize the importance of I and just keep incorporating it.
Right.
I like working with anger because it shows people so much. It's what people do with anger that gets them in trouble. Their anger's natural.
Well, I was going to say, I've heard a lot about anger being, when you get angry, it's because something important has just happened. It's something that is important to you, and that's why you need to pay attention to it, because there's some thought processes there that are saying hey, wait a minute, this is important and you need to pay attention.
Right. And I truly believe that goes back to respect. And people have such a hard time respecting themselves and their own needs. But that's what I see as anger being a gift, because it is kind of a cage rattler. When you realize that you're angry, there's purpose. Look at it. And it'll show you that you just got disrespected. And somewhere in your psyche, that's not okay.
And I think for me, self compassion is having compassion and some grace for yourself who was put in positions that weren't necessarily where you wanted to be. Um, I, as a little girl, was put in a position with an angry father who would come into my room late at night, uh, angry at my mom, who would come into my room and wake up the 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old would get mad, and then it would stop. And no 3-year-old should have to have angry people coming into her room and waking her up. It's not fair.
No, it's not
Um,
fair. Another piece of that is you would get angry,
right.
which means that there's something in your psyche, even as a 3-year-old, you knew you were being disrespected and you got angry. Yay. So I really think anger is a gift because it can show us so much if we just acknowledge. And my favorite piece of advice is recognize you're angry and specifically what you're angry about. And then it's kind of like, oh, okay. If we don't acknowledge what we're angry about, we tend to just drag it on and on and on and on.
Right.
Yeah. But here again, when we acknowledge we're angry, which is not quite so hard to do, and specifically what we're angry about, we have validated ourselves, we have respected ourselves, we've acknowledged our feelings, and there we go back to self-worth, self-care.
Well, I think your work is really important, and I'd like you to repeat, if you can, about the selfishness and go into that a little bit deeper,
I
because
would be
we
happy
get that all
to.
the time
Yeah.
on the page that I work on, that people feel like they're selfish for saying, I feel this way or I think this way, and now everybody's telling me I'm selfish. Can you expand
I
on
would
that a
be
little bit?
happy to. Yes, people who say you're being selfish are not very helpful. You don't need them. So there's more than one way to, and we know people who really are selfish and egotistical, and we don't want to be that way. Our parents didn't want us to be that way, which is part of why we weren't able to make I statements. But there's more. There's another definition of selfish, and that's self-ish of the selfness that we are. Self-ish of the selfness that we are.
So it's going back to that in that statement that you're making. It's going back to that giving ourselves care is not selfish.
Mm-mm.
It's
No.
understanding that we
No.
have self.
Well, and it's not just self-care, it's self-validation. And since people in general don't feel they count, because going back to the inability to make I statements as kids, we're subtly programmed, subliminally programmed, that we don't count. So we start making I statements and realize there is more than one way to look at selfish. And to realize self-ish is of the selfness, with that hyphen between there,
I'll tell
of
you
the
what,
selfness that we are.
we're going to get into some great conversations with you because you have so much wisdom
Thank you.
that you've shared with me and others, um, that I'm so happy to have you on and have you um, share with the audience as to what these definitions are, why they're important, what drives them, how can I start, and we'll be giving some of your work on after the show, so that others can start this work of just learning how to make I statements, learning how to identify your feelings. How do I feel about it? Because we're real good at saying, how do you feel about this? Because I don't want you to be upset. So how do you feel about this? And we're not so good at saying, how do I feel? What do I think about this? And because it's looked as being selfish.
And I hope our talk today helps people to understand that how important it is to make those I statements, to validate, recognize your own worth and validate it.
It's definitely necessary out there for people to understand that what they have to say is important, and you can't give away what you
I
don't.
have to stress to people when we're talking about handouts, etc., that I had to learn this stuff.
You're a good teacher
Yeah.
of this stuff. And I'm going to be happy to have you on and talk about this and get your messages out there that you've come up with that are solid in how they work. And I can't wait to have you back on again.
I'm so excited to do this. I've had a thought off and on over the years. Is there a way I could let more people know about this? So I'm really excited about this because it's vital. It's vital.
Well, I'm so glad I reached out to you and asked you, and
Me too.
she got such light in her eyes when I asked her if she would come on and talk to y'all about this. So exactly, ding, 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 and let other people know how this works and what this means. So
we will get more into how to make the I statements work better, and understanding the feelings so that you can articulate. You don't have to say it to anybody. The hardest time to avoid a you sentence is when we're angry, and it's about the most important time to not start a sentence with you, because it goes nowhere. Nobody gets a sense of relief. Somebody else is angry because they got a finger pointed at them. So that's something that we just have to realize. And when we're starting a sentence with you, we've already devalued our own worth to ourselves.
Well, and I think we have to get really good at, like, in these domestic violence and abusive relationships, we become very reactive instead of responsive. And we have to think about disengaging from a conversation with someone that's going to continue just to go down a route that isn't about growth of self. It's about winning a battle or proving a point or trying to keep somebody from devaluing us any more than we already have. Whereas if we come from the inside and we decide that I don't have to have this conversation about my self-worth with anyone because I know that I'm okay. It's like I got called a moron. And I was like, am I a moron? No, I'm not a moron. So I don't need to even have a conversation with somebody about that.
That's the glory of acknowledging that pure okay peace that's in our core. Something comes along, it doesn't pertain anymore because we're okay.
Right. And I think it's hard to get there when you've been beat down as much as people who've been in these domestic, these DV cases.
And I can picture there are situations where someone would be really reluctant to make the I statements. I can relate to that, or I can understand it. I get it. I encourage people to at least practice in your mind.
Practice in your mind. Practice in your daily routine of just looking over I statements and trying to form them, even from things that have happened just recently, doesn't mean you have to go back and say them right away. You can have them to practice in your back pocket for when it comes
Absolutely.
up,
Absolutely.
because it will come up again
Mm-hmm.
until you
Mm-hmm.
attack it and attach to it and decide
Yeah,
and make
I believe when people start making those I statements, it starts opening up something they had forgotten about, didn't realize was still there.
Yeah, for me, it was not even, I was too busy trying to help everybody else because I thought that's what my job was.
Well, if you could fix other people, then look how good you'd feel about yourself. And of course, it never worked.
No, it never works. You gotta take care of self, and then the rest will come.
And I truly believe that the best way to care for self is to acknowledge the self and validate the self as is.
And I think having compassion for the self, because I don't even think that's ever talked about in understanding where you've been, understanding that there's a reason why you're responding the way, reacting the way you're reacting. So you can choose to respond a different way.
You made a comment a while ago, the difference between being reactive and responsive, and that's a very important part as well. A point.
Yeah,
we tend to react and react and react, and there's two parts of that. One of which is that we're telling ourselves we don't count by reacting, and that puts the other person in charge or in control. And I like to have people realize that there's a difference between in charge and control, and there's a difference between react and respond. An I statement about how you feel is a response. It's information. If people were to look at communication as information exchange, it would sure help. The I statements are a major basis for that.
Well, it's going to be a joy to have you on. I'm going to sign off for right now.
Okay.
And
I'm excited.
Me too. I can't wait to have you on. I will see you soon.
Thank you.
Much love.
You too.
Hello. Thank you for watching our channel today. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for any new content and find us on Patreon and your favorite podcasts. We hope we're one of them. Bye-bye.